Hello, and welcome to our next session for this 2024 conference. My name is Dana Taylor, and I am on the advisory board for SAI. And I'm very excited to be introducing our next guest, who is Father Nathan Castle. Father Nathan is originally from Groves, Texas, and he entered the Dominican order in 1979. He received his MA and MDiv degrees from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. He served on several campus ministries and is currently in residence at the University of Arizona. Father Nathan has helped more than 500 stuck and not so stuck souls who died suddenly and traumatically to adjust to the afterlife. He believes that providing such help is something the Holy Spirit has given him and his prayer partners to do. Well, welcome, Father Nathan, and please also introduce us to your very special guest.
This is the canine face of God. His name is Toto. I get to share him. My best friend is actually his master, and I'm over in their guest room today. And when we do the work that I'll talk about in this session, it involves souls that died suddenly and violently. So people that have been through trauma, and they find me in the night in a vetted, organized process and show me what happened to them. And they're working through a first level of trauma to be able to enjoy the afterlife. And we're sort of the discharge staff that helps them out the door when they don't need this first level of care and they're kind of ready for an adventure. And this little guy had a traumatic start in life. He was a rescue, and the first 2 years of his life were in a cage mostly. And he just has a heart for compassion. He hasn't been through that training that, those support dogs do, but he seems to have a knack for it. So he won't be with us the whole time. He has dog things to do, but I at least wanted him to have a chance to say hello to you.
Well, welcome, Toto. All right. Well, we're just opening up the time to you to share as you would like, and then we will have questions in the last section of the time allotted.
Sure. Well, I'm grateful to be invited, and on my screen, Yvonne is up there in one of the little boxes. And I have to say to all of the people that know Yvonne one way or another, whether in person or over the internet, she's just a doll. She came on my podcast. Do you remember that, Yvonne? We spent like an hour and a half, and you went into great detail about all the different experiences that you've had. I got to the end of it and discovered I hadn't hit the record button. Do you remember? And you didn't make me feel stupid. I did that all by myself. But you added nothing to that. So you were just the soul of gentleness and patience. So I'm grateful for that. It's a happy memory. Well, the work that I do is been a part of my life, really all of my life. I'm 68 years old. I'm a Roman Catholic priest, Dominican priest, and I grew up in a family that taught me right away about spiritual things. I didn't have to necessarily awaken to them as though I had never heard of them, because they were just kind of there all along. Um, I'm one of five children. My mom was a great teacher of not just religious rules and things, but of spiritual practice. And I can remember as a very little boy being told at night to go put my pajamas on, brush my teeth, and she'd be in a minute so that we could talk to our heaven family. That I had a family on earth that I spent the day with. The heaven family was always around too, but we made it a special point before going to sleep to talk to them. And she knew that I had a great love for pirates as a little kid. The way that some kids know every kind of dinosaur there is. That wasn't a thing in 1959 or 60, but I had a record, a book that had a record that lived inside of it in a little sleeve, a 45 RPM record. And I couldn't read yet, but I could play the record, and it was it was Peter Pan, and so it had pictures of pirate related things. And there's this classic picture of a desert island with one palm tree, maybe a crab or a broken boat that is the reason you can't get off the island, and then a dotted line running through it with an X. And I learned very early on that the X marks the spot where the treasure's buried. Well, she knew that I knew that, and she was teaching me the sign of the cross, which is the standard Catholic Christian way of beginning spiritual communication. And we touch our forehead to call our mind into what we're doing. We touch our heart to call all of the seat of our emotions into what we're doing. And then we kind of swoop across shoulder to shoulder across the pulmonary system to bring our breath and the whole of our body into what we're doing. Um, and then she said, after you do that, then knock on the door. Knock on the door. And because she said to me, what letter does that make when we do that? Well, it makes an X. Well, X marks the spot right in the middle of you. And if you knock on the door, that's where the treasure's buried, and you can talk to God because God lives inside you. So I was learning that as a 3-year-old. And I was also taught that God lives everywhere and, is in heaven and the faraway places and so on. But I didn't have to go to great lengths to try to shout at the heavens or get a good internet connection or anything like that. All I had to do was go into my heart and talk to God, who would meet me there, or who lived there always anyway. So I had that great advantage. And one of the things that they taught me as a little child, both of my dad's siblings became Dominican nuns in the same order that I'm in. In fact, their habit looks very much like what I'm wearing. They both taught first graders, so they were great with kids and teaching the faith to kids. And one of them took me aside when I was almost 7, about to make my first communion. And she said, you must listen to me very carefully. God loves everybody and hears everybody's prayers, but the prayers of children go straight to God's heart. And you won't be a child for very long. So don't waste your short childhood. Pray for everyone and everything you can think of. And so I did, because that made sense. I'm only really conversant in Christianity and a smattering of stuff from a class or two in comparative religion. But in the Christian story, and even in the Jewish story, the youngest son ends up, the one that's out tending the sheep is the chosen one, or the parables of the lost coin or something. The last shall be first. It just made sense to me that little kids would have a superpower of prayer. So I used it. And I became aware of death. I wonder, for people that are watching and listening, how old were you when death became something that you could wrap your head around? That you were only here in this body for a time? Oops, I told you he wouldn't be with us too long. Hang on a second. You go.
Okay.
His master is here, and he hardly ever lets him out of his sight. It's like he's got to watch him every minute. But anyway, I didn't have death happen to me early in life, but I was just conscious of it, that, you didn't know when it would happen, and you had to be ready. And then they were teaching us about what happens when people die, that we don't just disappear, that we have a body and a soul, and the body part dies, but the soul lives on, and it goes somewhere. And the way it was taught to me, it was like, when you die, your soul can go one of 3 places: Mexico, the United States, or Canada. It was like there was these 3 nation states in the sky or something, where there were borders between them, and different kinds of people went to different ones. Well, they explained that heaven was like for when you were perfectly ready to greet God and be in the presence of God. And then hell would be for people that were just terrible. But it seemed to me there weren't that many terrible people or that many perfect people, that most people would land in the middle, and that would be the most populated one. So I ended up learning about how to pray for people. We were taught that because people stay alive after they die, they still move and change and grow, and we can still help them. And we can do that with our prayers. So I would, once, in about maybe 2nd grade, by then, I could read well enough to get the newspaper and look for the obituaries. We had a newspaper in the morning and one in the evening, and they both had a whole page of people who had died recently, whose picture was in the paper. And if you read down to the bottom of it, it would say what church their funeral was going to be at. And in the early 60s in Southeast Texas, nobody had a funeral except in a church. Even if you didn't go to that church, hardly ever, you didn't go to the beach to have a funeral. You went to some church somewhere. So I knew I was taught that only the Catholics know there is a purgatory and that they should pray for their dead, and nobody else, none of the other Christian groups knew to do that. So I just decided, well, that doesn't seem fair. If you happen to be a Baptist and you die and nobody prays for you, well, then I'll pray for you. So I made it my business to be praying for all the people that might not have anybody praying for them. And I would take the newspaper to bed, or then I was imagining that it must be organized because God created order. God wouldn't create a chaotic universe, and it would be scary to die and then land in some mob somewhere. It must be organized. So I imagined the bank because my dad took me to the bank because I had a college savings account. I was only 7, but I had those tiny little book. And when you get to the bank, it's organized. They're not ready to see you just yet, so you have to wait. But if you wait patiently, you'll get to the front. But then I decided, well, geez, nobody wants to wait. Maybe I could be the helper in purgatory that knew people. I could be in charge of prompt customer service in purgatory. So if I saw you coming in, I would say, would you like me to take you up to the front? So I would pray for people's progress. And I did that, I don't know, for a long, long time. But then I got ordained to the priesthood when I was 29 years old and was going about my life. I'd had some what Yvonne would call spiritually transformative experiences along the way before that, which would be for another time. And they're all told in different books that I've written. But this particular thing I want to talk about today, the souls coming looking for help, happened on a retreat in northern Arizona in about 1997 or 8. I was the director of the Newman Center, the Catholic Center at Arizona State University. And on a retreat, I had a dream that woke me, and it was trauma, but it wasn't my trauma. One of the things that priests often have to do is, at least we used to, have a pager that was on the nightstand when it was your turn to do hospital calls. So if on Tuesday night you had the pager and somebody at the hospital called, wanting a priest to come right away, it would be you. So I knew I had the experience of being awakened in the night by a traumatic event, needing to organize myself and get there and help anoint somebody. Well, I was on this retreat and this dream happened, and it felt like being called by somebody that was in turmoil. And it was a young man dying on the hood of a car. The car was from the late 50s, the kind with fins and chrome. He was burning alive and screaming and angry. And I woke up and I just thought, well, I said a prayer. I don't know who you are, but my name is Nathan. I just got this dream. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out in the morning. I'm going to go back to sleep now. But I'll see you in the morning. And on the retreat, there was a woman who had a lot of spiritual gifts the people that are attending this whole thing have probably got just about every gift under the sun, I would imagine, if you went person by person. But this one friend of mine that was on the retreat, I knew to be very spiritually gifted, and we were used to praying together. And so I said, would you mind if we find a little bit of a break time today? Could we pray about this thing that just happened to me during the night? It seems like somebody's in trouble. So we did that mid-morning, I think. And in that experience in prayer, she said, well, whoever this guy is, he really wants to talk to you. Would it be okay if I allow him to? And I knew that she could. I think that's commonly called channeling. We don't use that word in the Catholic Church because it upsets people. I believe it's a gift of prophecy, that the Jewish prophets allowed their voices to be borrowed by God to speak to the people. So anyway, I said, yeah, we protected ourselves in prayer. We bring in Michael the Archangel, Mary, the Mother of Jesus, a whole host of angels and saint power to make sure that we are not picking up hitchhikers. We're doing everything we can to create sacred spiritual space. And I said, yeah, go ahead. And the guy spoke through. He told us what he wanted and how we could help him. And over a period of a few sessions, we did that. and he accomplished what he wanted to do. I've told that story enough times that I didn't want to go into it completely on this opportunity because it's at the beginning of the first of my books. They all look like this. This one is the second, but it's the first one, which is over there across the room. But that's told in the first of my Afterlife Interrupted books. But I wanted to share a story or two with you, and either Dana or Yvonne, if you want to jump in and be like a interviewer, that'd be okay by me if you feel like it, if the spirit moves you.
I'd be happy to do that because I'm a big fan of yours. I've read your books and been
Well, then
listening
all
to
the
you.
more we should get to know each other.
Okay, that's great because I'm like, oh, I'd like to ask some questions, but so great. That's
Okay.
fantastic. All right.
I'm better in something more conversational than I am in just
Okay.
a monologue. So
Okay. That suits me. I'll tell you something. It's very strange to me that we're doing this because about 6 years ago or seven, I was at a random party and your first book had just come out, and I don't think it had any reviews or was well known at all
uh,
at that point. And somebody said to me, I'm reading the most fascinating book. And I was like, what is it? And I got it. And I've got a review up on your, website before you were as well known as you are now. So I just feel like I've been in this game for quite a while.
well,
So
God bless you. Thank you for that. Um, well, the thing that the reason I do all this is I really Jesus told his disciples at the end of Matthew's gospel, go out to all the world and tell the good news. And the good news is they can crucify you, but you won't stay dead. You just won't. You're not something that can be snuffed out and forgotten. And I just believe helping people reimagine dying, the approaching of death, illness, or whatever, loss of loved ones, having the certain joyful hope that there'll be reunions or that I'll see an even better version of my loved one when it's time. I just think that's worth doing for a lifetime. So
well, I think it was so wonderful that you grew up in such a loving family that gave you this wonderful foundation of spirit from the very beginning of your life.
me too. And
That
even
is
though
so
I'm a
rare.
lifelong Catholic and I'm well aware of the church's sins and nonsense and so on, but I was also a kind of a sassy teenager, kind of sarcastic. And at some point, I got tired of hearing myself judge other people. You know how you can just sneer at everything and say, I won't have anything to do with that because of this, that, and the other. Well, I just decided I wanted to be a person that planted myself somewhere. And I looked around and I decided there used to be a poster in the late 60s. You remember it, Bloom Where You're Planted?
Oh, yeah.
It was just kind of on every wall where somebody was doing drugs or whatever they were doing in the 60s. But I bloomed where I was planted and just thought, this will be my spot. And
That's
so
fantastic.
anyway, the one thing led to another. And after this experience on that retreat, people started coming about once a week during the night. And almost always they were showing me car crashes or um, shootings or stabbings or drownings or something that would cause a person to die in a traumatic way. And they didn't really need counsel, I learned. They just were in a process that was organized. Um, and it made sense to me that the universe, God, heaven, however you imagine it, is not chaotic. It's
Right. Well, I will say your books to me have been a revelation of seeing the afterlife in this organized way.
oh yeah.
As you said earlier on that the Catholics only have purgatory and the rest of us that are Protestant, we didn't get that, and I wasn't raised with that. I've heard of the bardo. Is that another word, would you
Well,
say, for
I
purgatory?
think that comes from the East. Is that Buddhist, the Bardo?
I think
Or
so. I
Hindu?
think, well, they did this book about Abraham Lincoln. I
Yeah,
think they
I
called
read
it the
Lincoln at
bardo.
the Bardo. I
Yeah,
loved it.
yeah, right.
But
And so that's kind of where I picked that up, but I think you're right. But so all of a sudden you present in your books this very orderly way of immediately the afterlife having a way of helping people
yeah,
make it that the consciousness does not end.
Not at all. And there's no one way that it moves. I wondered, for example, if you died in a plane crash that killed a bunch of people at once, would you all be rounded up and, you know, escorted somewhere? And I found that no, it doesn't happen it could happen that way, but it doesn't need to. That we each have a guardian spirit, which as a Catholic Christian, I call a guardian angel. And they're real, they're personal, they're non-human, but they're delightful. And for people that died in a violent way, the guarding function isn't really over. They just went through a trauma. So it's nice that their guardian can stay with them. Sometimes they didn't know they had a guardian, and the guardians will show up to them in whatever way helps the most. They can be somebody that sits off in the corner if you want to be left alone, but you're not going to be completely alone because your guardian's going to be there. Well, anyway, by the time they get to us, they've been through a process that many of them compare to some kind of like Betty Ford clinic, some sort of well equipped healing place that has abundant good things in it, and none of it costs anything. I remember dealing with a man who died in poverty in South America, and he awakened after his death in this hospital-like thing, and he said, "I must be rich. The sheets are clean, the food's hot." He said, "I could never have afforded to go to any kind of medical facility like this, and here I was." And they don't usually need to stay in something that seems medical for very long, because whatever they touch, whatever they're given to work with is healing. And it all works. There's none of this stuff about giving somebody a drug and try this for 2 weeks and let's see if it works. They all were working through a healing process, and they're becoming detached from anything that holds them back. Um, like you could understand why somebody might be really angry at their murderer, but you don't have to default into hatred. You could just say, well, I got murdered. That happens to some people, and it happened to me. I think I'll hold off on any thought about that because there are other things in front of me that are more pleasant possibilities. So
That's where you kind of help people get unstuck.
the ones that are stuck, my first book, I put the subtitle was Helping Stuck Souls Crossover, because several of them seemed like they were in a PTSD loop, where they involuntarily couldn't quit thinking about the accident or the shooting or the whatever. And I've dealt with people who have that kind of trauma memory, and there were some that felt like they had brought that with them into the afterlife. And so we call them stuck because they just felt like they couldn't get traction. But others were really not that. They just had stuff to work through, and they needed a special place to do it before they went on to all kind of afterlife adventures. Do you know, Danny, have you been to a funeral where people say, well, now Jack must be up there, on the first tee in heaven with all of his golf buddies, or or she must be, with her bowling team or whatever. They'll have that's all fine, unless you just got murdered a minute ago. Maybe you don't want to tee it up in heaven just this minute until you have a chance to, get your bearings and be grounded a bit. So anyway, what the method that because you've read a book, is that I have received the dream and I write it down. I keep a pad, a journal on the nightstand anymore, so I don't stumble around in the dark looking for something to write with. I keep a journal on the nightstand. About once a week, I get one of these, and I call them a contact dream. I distinguish between having a dream, which I do the other 6 nights a week about my own psychobabble. But about once a week, there is a contact dream that somebody else's material moving into my consciousness. And because this is a place where people talk about consciousness, I've wondered about it, and sometimes it comes up in the conversation. One guy said, well, your consciousness is kind of like a sparkly green river. And they bring you next to it, but you still have to launch the boat. You have to get in it. So I don't know. And I asked early on, how did you find me? And people would say, I don't know, somebody brought me here. That was the most common answer. Somebody said your light was on, which reminded me of Motel 6, uh, we'll leave the light on for you. But
Right.
they come and we've discovered that they're vetted. They're not random. They've been um, overseen and cared for, and their caregivers say, this one doesn't need to be here with us any longer. Here's a way toward the door. And I think of us as the discharge staff. My prayer partners and I help people move from, and they very often talk about, spatial images going from here to there. But they also talk about moving from energetic levels that seem to be stacked upon one another, more like the radio band, you know?
Right. I wondered about that reading your book that, okay, so these people are at this level, and
Yeah.
like there's like you talk about this like a nursing home or a hospital, and I thought, well, does that mean they're kind of having to get their frequencies from the trauma of being here kind of raised up a little bit so they can go to those other
Maybe,
levels?
but maybe if they were somebody that was a member of this group who talks about frequencies a lot or Kundalini
Right.
awakening, has the language of a lot of consciousness, comparative stuff.
Lingo.
But many people don't have that. They're just somebody that drives a truck, or whatever it is they
Right.
do. They're gonna speak the language they know, and
Right.
most they just talk about what and who is around them, and
Hmm.
they're in a process of some kind, and they know that other people know what they're doing, and so they just trust the way that when I go to I'm hardly ever ill, but if you've had to have a surgery or something, you don't know how to do your heart bypass. You have to trust that the people that say they know what they're doing know what they're doing, and then put
Right.
yourself in care. That's the way they are. They're just in a continuum of care. I thought it might be fun to at least share an example.
Oh,
um,
absolutely.
of,
And
of
give people an idea. Like in your book, you have a very set out plan thing of you get together with your prayer
yeah.
partners, you go through this, and then you go through that. So let's
You are
go
good at
through
what
that
you do.
process.
You are good at what you do, because I sort of interrupted myself. I was doing that, but so that receive the dream, write it down, and then I make an appointment with prayer partners, and that used to be in person most of the time until the pandemic, and then we started doing it on Zoom and just found that it was so easy to do, and it didn't matter where people were. Most Friday mornings and Saturday mornings, I have 2 hours each day with different prayer partners in different parts of the country. We just make an appointment, and they know to dedicate the time. We block off 2 hours, and we can usually do two crossings. They usually take about 40 minutes apiece. Uh, and we become friends, so we end up chatting, at the front end anyway. But uh, when we're in it, we do protective prayer with the angels and saints. Then I read the story that I have in my dream journal. In the Roman Catholic tradition, we have something we call Lectio Divina, which is a way to read scripture passages that's meditative. So you have a little chunk of material, but somebody in the group reads it, and then you all sit still, and then somebody else will read it, another voice, and we think of it, receiving it in the mind and then receiving it in the heart. The data, and then the emotion that moves from it. So we go into prayer, and then when we've protected ourselves in prayer, I'll read the story. I'll usually pause. I record it on an app on my phone called Rev. So I get I'll have a transcript of just what happened in that person's words. They're moving through me, but they're recorded. Um, so I hit the button on the recording. Um, and then I usually ask for their guardian angel, because they're so good at providing just a little bit of a mic test. You've done mic tests yesterday and today, and make sure all of these connections work. Um,
Right.
this person is going to speak through another human being's voice, and it's probably the first time they've ever done that. And so you're asking them to do something they've never done, and that might be just a little different, or might make you a little nervous. So the guardian angel will come on the line, partly just to show them how easy it is to do. So a little bit of a mic test. And then dreams can be a little vague. They can have some indistinctness because of symbology or something. Or if there are a
Mhm.
bunch of people in the dream, which one are we supposed to be helping? Um, so they'll give, or you might have shown me in the dream that you died at the wheel of a vehicle, but you didn't give me your gender. I'd like to know whether I'm
Mhm.
talking to a man or a woman. So they'll sometimes give us a little bit of a helpful detail.
Now,
And
when
then,
you say the guardian comes through, you're saying, and I think people need to understand this, the guardian comes through you
yes,
most
through
of the
my
time.
doors. I allow them
That
in, I invite them in.
you get a space, but you also are very aware of what the guardian is saying. Is that true? That's the impression I
Yes,
get
I'm
from
not
your
in
book.
a trance. I'm fully alert. I'm
Okay.
co-conscious with the guardian or later with the person that they assist. And I only speak English, and they don't have to know English in order to do this. They are just told, form your thoughts as you always have, and they'll come out of him in English.
Okay. And then do you get a visional, like I mean, I'm reading your book and I'm saying you see the guardian. Do you see the guardian in a visual way, or are you just feeling
Hardly
an
ever.
energy, or how does it work?
No, but their energy can be very different. Sometimes you'll get somebody that their energy feels like they're very studious or bookish, you know, or their energy will feel very uh, overflowing and jubilant, or even silly. They're persons, and so they have elements of personality that are distinct, just as our personalities are different from one from another. So I don't really see them, but I feel them more
Okay.
than more than that.
Okay.
They come through and they're usually a little playful, and they've kind of created a habit of choosing a name for the day that somehow has something to do with the story that's about to unfold. Um,
Wonderful.
and then they'll give us a little detail, and then we'll say the guardian will say, "I think I've done all I need to do. I'm going to slide to the side now. I'll be with you in prayer. The one they often say this, the one I guard and love will be next." And then a person will come on the line and say what they need to say. So
So,
that's where I think I'd like to go into one of the stories.
perfect.
Did you happen to read the second book?
I'm in the middle of it right now.
Have you come across Claire and Celie the stewardess?
Yes, yes, I've read that one.
It's such a sweet story. It's a murder.
Yes.
It's a very sweet. This poor lady, Claire, I think she was in either Oregon or Washington State in a rural area on a dirt road under a canopy of trees. And she was up in years, mid-70s or older, but she had had a fall and a cracked rib, and she wasn't really moving much. And neighbors were bringing her food, and she wasn't going to church because it was too much effort. She belonged to a church, but it was just too hard to get out of the house. So she said she was dozing one afternoon and she heard a rattling at the door that woke her. And she thought, that's odd. I wasn't expecting anyone just now, but so many people were coming and going, it wasn't as odd as it might have been. But she said she stood and looked, and it was a couple that she didn't know that she thought looked like trouble right away. She thought they must have been on drugs. And in the woods, there were different, you know, pot growing or, some other kind of drug activities going on in the woods. So she said, I tried to muster myself and defend my home. And she sounded like she might have weighed about 90 pounds. And she
Yes.
said, I
I
tried to
thought of
muster myself.
Grandma Clampett.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Well, she said, maybe that wasn't such a good idea because all he did is give me one shove. I hit the coffee table and the floor, and that was the end of that. Um, but then she said, but my guardian that I didn't even know scooped me up and put me above the roof of my house and beneath the canopy of trees that were over it. And then my guardian said, what I want you to do is pretend you're a dog that just went swimming, and I want you to shake off what just happened in the last few minutes. So she said, well, okay, I'll do that. And then she said, the guardian said to me, you understand that what's just happened and you've left your body, you've died. And then I love the understatement in this. The guardian said, it's unpleasant here. Let's leave.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. She's got this home invasion going on. I thought that too. And she's like, let's just go now.
Your murdered body is on the floor of your house. It's unpleasant here. So let's go somewhere else. And if you remember, he said to me, would you climb on my back and I'll fly us out of here? And it
That's
made
right,
her think
because physically she was still pretty weak. She didn't have that much mojo, it
she
seems to
had some
me,
out of
right off
body
the
form
way.
because we all do.
Yeah.
She had some sort of spirit body, but she was an elderly lady that was frail. And her guardian just said, let me fly us out of here. And it reminded her of tandem skydiving that she'd seen in a documentary on TV. And she thought the last thing I would have ever done is jump out of a plane. But she said, in the moment, I didn't have a better offer. So she said, so I climbed on his back and he flew me out of there. And then she was in somebody's care. I don't remember all of it. It's in the text, but she was cared for and strengthened until she came to us, and she knew it was time for her to move along, and she needed somebody to guide her, to come for her. And so my prayer partner asked, do you know anybody who has died, who you know loves you, who you'd be happy to see? And she said, oh my heavens, it would be Celie. She's my sister, and she died 40 years ago, and I've been talking to her photograph ever since. I would love to see Celie if she's available. And so in a minute, I said, okay, let's be still. Let's see how this plays out. We're asking for Celie. And then she's the one that described it in very vivid terms. I didn't see it. She just described it. And she said, well, would you look at that? She looks like a little tart. And I said, well, what does that mean? And she said, well, do you remember when the airlines were young and they made all the stewardesses be real skinny? They put them in these sexy little outfits. She said she always wanted to be a stewardess and she never got to be one. And so what she's showing me is she's on one of those planes like from the early 50s where they put a little staircase next to it that you had to climb up. And she's at the top of it and she's got a tray with an umbrella drink. And she wants me to know that she's going to seat me in first class in her plane. She said, it's just girls having a bit of fun. Uh, but that's how she went from place to place with an umbrella drink in first class with her sister, the stewardess, serving her. So if that sounds crazy to you, well, that's okay. It's just crazy funny, I think. That's one.
Right.
And then I thought, how are we doing for time? We got about, what, 20 more minutes?
Well, we go into questions usually at the 15 after, right? Yeah. So we got about 7 or 8 minutes before we go
Okay.
into other questions.
Okay. I see people do that all the time when they have guests on a show.
I
They
guess
tell
I
them,
don't know what time it is. No, do we have the full hour? No, you're right. We have all the way till 1:30 and then questions.
okay, I don't
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
be breathless while I
Right.
tell
You
this
got at
story.
least 20 minutes or more.
All right, these kind of go back to back. There's two stories that happened in Baghdad. One of them was the dream was uh, really appalling. I dreamt that I was in this place and it was windowless. I have it right here. I'm going to read it to you. I was in a large, drab public building. I don't think it was in the US. I came through a door into a courtyard where many people had been shot. Others were trying to hide but didn't know from which direction the shooting had come. People were terrified. Things shifted. I think a woman was being forced to shoot people or she would be killed, and I awoke. Um, what this turned out to be was it was in Baghdad during the Iraq War. There was a man named Nadi who was the protagonist of this dream story. He said, "Our we were killed by the other kind of Muslims, Sunni Shia violence." He said, "The way we prayed offended them, and they bombed our mosque and made it impossible to use." He said, "We didn't have an imam anymore because of the war. So many things were disorganized. So the religious leadership was too." But he said, "I was a businessman, and there were several others of us in the community that made it our business to figure out where we could pray safely. So we rented a warehouse. We thought windowless would be better and safer. So we wanted something that was sort of bunker-like, and we found a warehouse where we could do that. So they were at prayer when the shooting starts. But if you remember, Muslim men and Muslim women pray in different spaces. They're not mixed together. So the women, the wives and daughters were across the street in another place, and all the men were in this other space. And the men had to decide when they heard machine gun fire, do we dare open the door to go check on our wives and daughters, or do we stay here behind the door? Well, Nadi couldn't imagine allowing himself to stay behind a door while the women of the community might be murdered. So he ventured out. And when he did, he showed me in the dream, there were people on the ground bleeding and moaning. And then when he turned to his right, there was a 10-year-old girl with two men standing over her with machine guns pointed at her head, telling her that she needs to shoot me or they'll shoot her. And she did. She shot and killed him. So that was his leave taking. So he had gone through a healing process but came to us. And I remember him saying, I would have never thought I would be doing this at all, but especially to be doing with an American, a Christian, and a priest. I said, well, there you go. With it. That's what you got today. And he said, well, they've also told me that my religion taught me many true things, but that sometimes it didn't get things right. Sometimes it taught us to place a lot of importance on our own kind. And he said that was the heart of the problem in our country. There were so many people who thought of the others as the wrong kind, and then we were violent toward each other. That was the problem. We thought of others as being different than us in a way that was threatening. You know how when there's an international incident like a plane crash, and they'll say, and among the 300 who were killed, there were 3 Americans. Because that's
Yes.
really important. We need to know that there were 3 Americans out, and they weren't all just Chinese. He said, we do that too. And he said, when that earthquake happened that killed all those people in the Indian Ocean, we Muslims said, oh, isn't it terrible? 250,000 people and so many Muslims. Like, he said, somehow we were taught to put more value on what we thought was our own kind than on any other kind. And one of the things I've been learning here is that we're all each other's kind. So he ended up crossing, he said, our land was between the rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris. And he said the land here was very dry, and it had not been for those 2 big rivers, we probably wouldn't have been able to live here. And he said every celebration that we ever had some association with the river. A lot of parades on little barges. And he said, when it was time for him to cross, we said, well, just open your imagination and ask God to, ask the Spirit, ask the universe, whatever you want to call it, to take you to the next place. And he said, already it's happening. He said, gently the water below me is rising. It's not a threat. I'm not going to drown. I'm just going to wade in shallow water. The water needs to be enough to carry the floats, because here come the floats. And he said, everybody here, and he was in a group, he said, everybody here is someone is floating up to them who's just the right person. The floats
Beautiful.
decorated, and he said a lot of them were harvest festival things, but they were seasonal festivals. And he said, the one coming from me has my Father on it, and he's reaching out for me, and he wants me to take his hand. So it's time for me to go.
Beautiful. So it became a real celebration.
It was. I've seen a lot of parades, hot air balloons, people that
Yeah.
love fast cars, cars, celebrities showing up for them. There's just no end to the
Wonderful.
fun of it. Sometimes it's nothing but going for a walk.
Yeah.
But it can also take all kinds of shapes and forms.
Right. There's one that's for whatever reason, when I woke up this morning, it came to me. It's from your first book. I don't remember much else, but for some reason, this keeps coming at me, and it's coming at me right now. So I think there's a reason for it.
Okay,
And
shoot.
that was somebody who needed somebody. I think it was a young man, and he really needed somebody. And the person who came for him was General Dwight Eisenhower.
Oh, that's a wonderful story.
Do you remember that story? Could
His
you,
name
for
is
some reason, I feel like we need to share that one.
All right, good. That one, for people that are followers of Jesus, that's a particularly sweet story because Jesus shows up in it. The young man's name is Dwight. He showed me in a dream. This one was very vivid. It was sexual, and there was somebody I didn't know on top of me, shirtless, and he stabbed me in both breasts, and I woke. I thought, what in the world was that? And I wrote it down. It turned out that it was a young man. He was a Catholic guy, He said, I wasn't absolutely sure I was gay, but I was pretty afraid that I was. And he said, and on top of that, he was trying to be delicate. And he said, have you ever heard of people that have a desire for feeling or causing pain during sex? And my prayer partner said, you mean sadomasochistic sex? And he said, yeah, that. He said, I don't know why I had such an itch for that, but I did. And he said, I'd never tried it before, but I talked to some people and they said, here's what you do. You go to this particular bar, you stand at this end, you stand near this door, somebody comes, and the rest of it flows. So he did all of that. And he went into this little room and was told, someone will be joining you very soon. Well, somebody did join him soon, a stranger to him. And the guy said, would you mind if I tie you to the bed? Well, he allowed that. And then instead of some little knife or something that might have caused a little bit of pain, he said he pulled out things that were like curtain rods that were sharpened like pencil points. And I couldn't defend myself because my hands were tied, but he jammed them into both sides of me. And I said, what are you doing to me? That was in the dream. What are you doing to me? And then he said, the room started filling up with people in a situation where he wanted privacy. Nobody would have wanted an audience to that. And we asked what kind of people, and he said, spirit people. It started filling up with spirit people. And then he ended up in a hospital bed. And he said, you know how in hospitals, there's different shifts during the day. You might like the nurse, that's the afternoon one, or different people come in and they look at monitors or they take your blood pressure or sometimes they come to feed you. Well, there was this one guy that was more like a chaplain, and all he did is come and visit. And he didn't stay very long because you shouldn't. Is this coming back to you, Dana? Do you
Yeah,
remember
it
it?
is. Yeah. Okay.
Uh, she said this guy just was a nice guy, and he all he did was pay attention to me and show concern for me. And he didn't stay long because he shouldn't. And when you're that ill, but he said, I'll be back and I'll stay a little bit longer each time until you're out of here. And and then on one of the visits, the visitor said to Dwight, did you ever see a crucifix? And he said, sure, I was Catholic. I saw plenty of crucifixes. And he said, well, I'm that guy. I'm that guy. and, and he said, you know what? That on those crucifixes, they always have some little cloth over my midsection, but that day there was no cloth. They shamed me and I was completely naked like you were. And they also shut pointy metal things in me like he did to you. You know? Uh,
That's right.
so like, we're we have that in common. Um, so it was he told that story, but then it wasn't like Jesus sweeping him up and taking him into heaven. It was he he told us that story, but we said, well, it seems like it's time for you to pass. Should we ask for chaplain Jesus to come and take you along? And he said, well, I don't know. Let's just be still and see what happens. And we were, and he was inside me, and we were, and I said, I don't know why, but I'm thinking of Dwight Eisenhower, who was the president when I was born. This young man's name was Dwight. And
That's right.
and I said, it's Dwight Eisenhower. And my prayer partner said, you mean we're going to talk to the president? And he came right through and he said, well, I wasn't a Catholic, but I was asked to do a lot of things I never saw coming. I was given lots of responsibility for all kind of things, but I was never asked to do what you're doing. He said, but I'm ready to help. And this man is named Dwight because he was named after me. And he said, I know that these Catholic people, they very often have other people named after them. And so I've asked them, well, what do you do when somebody's named after you? And they said, well, you pay special attention to them. And so when they need something, you make yourself ready to help. And so he said, okay, I could do that. I don't need to have to be Catholic to do that. It's if any Dwights that were named after me. And he said, I knew that was happening because I was in charge of so many people and I couldn't know all of them. But I knew that people admired me and they were naming their sons after me. So he said, so anyway, this young man needs a helper today, and so I'm here to help. I think he just needs to go for a walk. So Dwight Eisenhower and Dwight, whoever he is, went for a walk.
They kind of went off together. So, I mean, that story to me shows such cosmic forgiveness And this fella who might have been shamed and all those things, to have these great people come forward and say, "You're great, you're one of us, one of God's people."
I've seen that over and over, that anybody that has some reason to feel like they are unworthy or uh, less than or something, if they really go into that, they have to come to the truth. And the truth is we're all made of the divinity. We're all made of God. We all have inherent dignity, regardless of what our life has come to. And and because I'm Christian, I use Christian language a lot. Jesus said, uh, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And what I've seen is in the progress that people are making in this first level of trauma care is they just need to come to the truth. You know, if they get all stuck over the fact that it was their driving mistake that killed them and their family, well, say that once and then get over it. You don't need to say that a dozen times or drag that out over the next 10 years. Can you just acknowledge it and get rid of it and then go on? And that's pretty much what Dwight did. He didn't wallow in his story. He just moved along.
Moving. What do you think? You've gone through all these. What are some of the top ideas that you think the living that are still here anyway, everybody seems to be living no matter what, but that are still on the planet can take from the stories and the examples that you're seeing come through from the other side? Does that
One of
question
them
make sense to you?
one is the importance of the present moment, not to allow yourself to dwell too much in the past or anticipate the future in ways especially that might frighten. Stay in the present moment, receive the present grace, do the present duty. That's real important. Another one is to be open to changing your mind. Dana, when's the last time you changed your mind about something important?
I think one of the things I've really changed my mind about is what the afterlife is.
Well,
Your story, I had a construct what I thought it was being, and then your book and another book I read, I'm like, I obviously don't know. I got to completely change my mind about, I guess, the essence of life and consciousness, truly.
well, and one phrase that I use a lot because when you tell stories like this, you can sound like you know all the mysteries of the universe, and people will ask you these cosmic questions. And Yvonne, you must get that too. Um, I just say, I don't know, but here's what I think, or here's what my experience has been. And just to try to keep it simple and speak your truth humbly. I think that's important. Keeping a sense of humor. These people that died in such horrific ways. This one guy in the third book died in a 15 passenger van inside an oil refinery. In this van was about to tumble, and he said, he said, I had a moment to think, I'm either going to die of blunt force trauma, or this thing's going to become a fireball and I'll burn to death, or I'm going to land in nasty water inside a refinery. What he had doors number one, two, and three, and they were all awful. And you know what he
Bad.
thought of? Do you remember the Far Side, the comics?
Yeah. Mhm.
There was a famous Far Side comic that had no caption because it didn't need one. It was just a drawing of a three-story building that must have been carried away by a flood because it's floating down a river. And it's on fire, and it's about to go over a waterfall. And on the outside of it, the sign on it just says Crisis Center. Every conceivable crisis is going on right now at the crisis center. He thought of that in the moment before he died. He said, damn, I'm in the crisis center. And then he did die. But he said he called his guardian angel Tinkerbell from the Wonderful World of Disney and Peter Pan. He said, Tinkerbell did a great job. She pulled me out of that mess before I could even feel any of it. She sat me down by the side of the road and she said, you can look over there if you want to. Your body's over there, but you're over here and you're safe. Do you understand? And he said, yeah, I do, because you explained it quite well. Uh, and he said, Tinkerbell said, I'm going to stay right here with you and we're not going anywhere until you say the word. And he said, do you mean I can sit on a road inside of a refinery next to a car crash as long as I want, or we can go somewhere else. Let's go somewhere else. So he was taken somewhere else. And then he didn't need very much afterlife care because he just traveled so light. He had a heart that just went, too bad. I just got killed in a car crash, but he was ready to do the next thing.
How about people? I guess a couple of things. I think about unforgiveness.
Yeah.
Is that a real issue? I would think it would be.
It is. It's one of the bigger ones. And um, because we're the discharge staff, we only work with people that are ready to move from the level that they're at to the next one. And so sometimes they talk about how much trouble and how they had to struggle to get to a certain level of forgiveness before they could even do what we do with them. But yeah, that one, I'd just say again, from a Christian point of view, I just say to people, remember what Jesus used one of his last breaths to say, Father, forgive them all. And he didn't handpick. He didn't say, and his hands were nailed to a cross. But he didn't get to say that one, but not that one. He just said, everybody, Father, forgive them. They all. And so I just say to them, if you don't have the power to do it on your own, ask for the power. It'll be given you if you want it. And then take it a day at a time. You don't have to do that in one fell swoop, but you'll get better at it the longer you stay with it. Just forgive.
I guess another thing, and I haven't seen this in your books, but people staying very attached to responsibilities or loved ones or being kept by people who won't let them go. Have you seen that kind of thing?
One that comes to mind was a woman who died when her children were still small. And she had allowed her whole sense of purpose to become raising her children to adulthood. And then when that was taken from her, and people started suggesting, well, there are other things you could do. Why don't you look at this, that, and the other? She said, I don't want any part of choosing a new thing. I didn't even get to finish the last one. And so she learned, she wanted to be able to visit her children and to interact with them. And so she was told there's a school for that, and we'll teach you how to do it. But it has to be done in ways that are helpful for you and for them. You can't just become some creepy spook. You have to learn how the right moment and way in which to build that into a larger life. I thought that was wise. Yeah.
Right. And it certainly appears that free will continues.
Absolutely. No question about it. Nobody forces you to do anything you don't want to do. Even if what you want to do is harmful to you, holding you back, people will say, guardians will say, you could choose to be vengeful if you want, but you won't be able to do that here. And we won't be able to help you nearly as much as we could if you'd made a different choice.
Choices. Well, we got a couple more minutes and then we'll open up to some questions. So if people have questions they want to put into the chat, I need to go be looking over here and see what's popping up here. So, okay, let's see. Let's see here. I guess I'll let you finish up if there's something else you want to say before we go into questions.
Well, I would just like for people to hold the thought that if the worst comes to the worst, there's still a new day. They talk about, if you don't live on the earth, it's not sunrise and sunset, but there's something still very like that, where there's always the opportunity to choose to welcome the new day, however you want to think of it. And people can, if you get old or ill or have different heartbreaks or whatnot, it can seem like there's no reason to hope, except there is, because there's always an opportunity for things to turn.
On this side or the next. Robert Bear asks, what are your thoughts on reincarnation?
That I'm pretty ignorant of it. I mean, I wasn't raised in a cosmology that included it. If you know the Christian Gospels, when people were trying to figure out who Jesus was, they asked, who is this guy? And one of the things they said, well, he must be one of the prophets back from the dead. So it wasn't as though the Jewish Christians from which Christianity emerges hadn't heard of it. But I haven't run across it. When I'm at SAI or at IONS, I listen respectfully to other people's stories about it, but it hasn't really entered into mine.
So you haven't seen people, yeah, when your books, I'm like, well, it looks like, that isn't part of the work that pops up at all in the work that
No,
you
and I
do.
wonder, I mean, the universe has such diversity in it. Can it be that a significant part of the population does that and another part doesn't, or does other things? I used to think there must be one template for how this all works. And then I've seen such specificity in it that I don't really assume that anymore.
Somebody wanted to know what church officials think of the work that you do.
The ones that matter most to me are okay with it. I have a vow of obedience to my religious superior. In the Western United States. Our headquarters for that region is in Oakland, California. And we elect our leadership. And in the time that I've been writing since 2018, we've had two different leaders, and they've both chosen to write a paragraph at the beginning of my books, just standing up for me and saying that I'm somebody they believe and trust. Beyond that,
Wonderful.
that's really all I need. It's not, I never expected that I would be supported across the board, but I don't know anybody that's supported across the board. Doesn't everybody have critics or whatever? I don't know.
Yeah.
I have this.
There's always a critic, always.
Yeah.
Somebody wants to know your definition or difference between hope and faith.
Well, I believe faith is in a person. I wonder if any of in your audience have been consistently loved by anyone in their life. A spouse that was true to their promises, or a parent that never gave up on you, or a school teacher or somebody. If you've been well loved by somebody, it's easier to be a person of faith, I think, because you know that somebody was trustworthy, and now you have a category for it. You know what it feels like to have faith in that person's goodness and the faith in the way that they'll treat you in the future or whatever. Hope, um, joyful hope is hugely important to me. Um, I think of hope as just, um, I think it's related to gratitude. I'm grateful for my life and all the blessings that I have. And I trust that I'll always be loved and well cared for. And I'll always have what I need. Then it's kind of on me to reduce my neediness. You know, I preached this morning on Johnny Appleseed at a mass this morning. Do you know that? Did you ever sing the Johnny Appleseed blessing at a camp or something? Do you know it?
Yeah, but it's been quite a while.
All right, let me sing it to you. Oh, the Lord is good to me, and so I thank the
And
Lord
the Lord
for giving me the
giving
things
me
I
the
need,
things
the
I
sun,
want.
the rain, and the apple seed. The
It was
Lord is good to
good
me.
to
It's
me. Yeah.
it's something that at church camp or whatever you sang before meals. He was an evangelist who supported himself by running across the upper Midwest planting apple trees. And he only needed sun, rain, and apple seed. The Lord's been good to me. I try to follow that and reduce the number of things that I think I really need so that don't, I'm less nervous about whether I'm going to have them or not.
Let's see. Somebody asked about calling on guides and like is it as simple as just saying their names? I know when you do your prayer protection, you have a lot of
Yes.
people that you call
I think
for.
this is something that people from a non-Christian tradition could borrow if they wanted to. We can try it on, but it's not difficult. Mind, heart, body, spirit, calling out to the divine in whatever name you use. And inside what we call the body of Christ are all the holy ones, all the angels, all the saints. I call on on my deceased family members who are in the light. There's just so many loving spirits and souls of different kinds around us. I I do that all the time, and sometimes you can do it without knowing exactly who to call for. You know, I internet problems. Somebody get over here and figure out why this connection isn't working or whatnot. I'll just pray to all the saints. Our feast on November 1st is all the saints, and November 2nd is all the souls, all the humans that have died. We have this grouping way of like saying, I don't exactly know what your name is, but would you come help me?
We need to give a shout out right now to your podcast. Somebody just reminded me of that because I don't think we've mentioned your podcast at all.
Oh, I wonder if that's my assistant. She might be on here doing that kind of thing. My podcast is called The Joyful Friar, Friar. It's, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm a Dominican. St. Dominic, his nickname was the Joyful Friar. So when I needed to name a show, I went in prayer and asked him, would it be okay if I did that? And it's not as though he talks every time I ever say a prayer, but this time he did. He said, I never called myself that at all. Go right ahead. He's fun.
Why don't you show us your book again? And you actually have now how many volumes? 3
Oh, this
volumes?
this is the first one. That was why Toto was in the
Oh,
picture at the beginning. And Toto 2, The Wizard of Oz is a spiritual adventure. That one was 2011. That was a lot of fun. And I do retreats based on that if anybody's interested in a retreat. And then the other 3 are called Afterlife Interrupted, books 1, 2, and 3. And they all have the same graphics, and they're all available on Amazon. All of the books are also audiobooks. If your audience prefers to listen while they commute or walk the dog or whatever, the third most recent one has been real difficult to get it all the way to the finish line, but we're almost there. It could be in the next week or two that one's available on Amazon.
well,
And
and your audio book, your first book I listened to, and I appreciated that you recorded that.
yes,
So
yes.
I was
And most
actually
of the
listening
time,
to you and
because the
Laura.
stories are dialogic, they're back and forth between a soul and the prayer partners. I tried to get the prayer partners to read their own parts as much as I could. So we're trying to give the reader or the listener the kind of the fly on the wall experience of the whole thing. And then one thing I was supposed to get a plug in for is I do a lot of things with IONS, International Association for Near-Death Studies, and the Hawaiian chapter is very, very active. And they're hosting me on July 20th, and they want me to talk about 2 things, about guardian angels and about the prayer of Compline, that is how to surrender your consciousness to sleep in a way that disposes you to spiritual help in the night. So that's
Oh,
coming up
interesting.
on
Yes, somebody has asked, how can we become connected to our guardian angel?
you could come to that talk. It'll be on Zoom on the 20th of July. And if you go to my website, nathan-castle.com, you'd find information on it there. And then we have lots of archived stuff on my YouTube channel, which is just called Father Nathan Castle. So especially during the pandemic when I couldn't go anywhere, I recorded just about every word I spoke. So you can find all kind of things on the YouTube channel.
Here's a question. Somebody wants to ask about working with people who've committed suicide.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they're all loved and they're not shamed. They're just given what they need. And they end up in a place, usually it has this kind of clinic surrounding, and they move through kind of like, at what point did you take the misstep that led to the next misstep that led all the way to taking one's own life? Was there a place where things began to unravel? That's a knowledge that can be helpful. Um, Uh, but they all get what they need and they're not shamed. And one said, you don't have to wear a name tag saying, hello, I committed suicide. He said, after a while, nobody cares how you died because we all died. And once you resolve whatever it is that was self-destructive and painful and whatnot, it's really just a part of your history story, but it isn't something that you have to drag around with you all the time.
Oh, forever.
Yeah.
Somebody else asked a question is, are you holding a soul back if you're spending a lot of time crying about them, missing them? Is that an issue?
I've heard that. What do you think about that?
I personally think it can play a role in keeping people maybe caught. It's hard when a loved one is hurting,
Yes.
and if we're still just a little bit, we're now out of body, but we're the same kind of people. Sometimes I feel like this is just me. Like sometimes people hang around until a certain group of people are all on the other side together. I don't know if that really, they're paying attention and then the people they knew are all on the other side.
One thing that I've learned is the fact that a relative comes back to visit you doesn't mean they're stuck. And they
Right.
might be several layers up the chain, however it works, but that doesn't mean they can't come to visit. Sometimes people will have a visit from a deceased loved one and go into a panic that, oh my God, Mama visited to me. That must mean she's stuck. Well, no, it must mean she loves you. And she paid a visit. Maybe she came from a distance to visit, but you
Hmm.
don't need to assume that she's in trouble just because she visited.
Right. My husband's been gone 11 years, and it seemed like he hung around for quite a while. And then later I got a message from somebody who said he's going to be busy and moving on now, but you know how to call him if you really need him.
My dad died in 1997, and he did something like that with me and said, "Soon, I'm going to be around sometimes, but then I'm going somewhere else and I'm not even sure where." So he can still show up from time to time, but he's got other things to do than
Yeah.
hang around here.
Somebody asked, do you think there's a life, like a pre-life plan?
I hear that all the time around ions, and maybe there is. And if I took part in one, I went through the veil of unknowing that was very effective because I don't know anything about it. If I had a pre-life plan to be this, uh, I don't know. I just don't know. I could see it fitting into a Catholic Christian understanding of things if that were revealed to be true. But for right now, I just don't know.
I don't know. I'm trying to make sense of this next question. Some people are with incurable choosing voluntarily stopping eating. Oh, I guess this is talking about people who uh just quit eating, they kind of push along their passing over
You mean like
by
people who just decide I'm ready to die now and don't eat anymore?
yeah,
Yeah, I've seen that.
right.
Yeah. Well, that's a thing that a person can do.
Hmm. Yeah. We don't eat, we will pass. But probably those people are thinking they're ready. Oh, and they're having and I don't know, she's not these people are asking questions about right to die, incurable diseases and
Oh.
suffering and all of that.
That's become an issue in Canada, and I think some of our states are moving in that direction now, and I think England is talking about that. And so, yeah, that's becoming. I mean, it's been a topic that's out there for a long time, but it's becoming more pertinent as more laws change. I haven't
That's
really
not
had to look
really
at it.
part of your work per
Doesn't mean it
se.
couldn't be. I might end up
Hmm.
helping somebody like that, but that hasn't come along.
I mean, you seem to be have this has been so much about people with violent deaths, traumatic deaths. That seems to be the theme of your particular work.
Except for ones that didn't die violently, but had a trauma from which they never healed and they brought it to the grave.
Hmm.
Do you remember, did you read the story of Wilhelmina, the lady whose husband died in front of her? And
I can't remember.
she was darning socks and he fell and died right in front of her. And she kind of had a soul death on the spot. And she dissociated for the rest of her life and pretended to be herself. But she lived for years. And one of the stories in the second book, I think, is a woman who was raped in her own home but never told anybody. And it had all kind of effects on her down the line that were traceable to that. And she never really dealt with it until after she had died. So
Wow.
she didn't die a violent death, but she had been the victim of a violent crime to her body, and she had to deal with that afterwards rather than before her passing.
So those things that get buried alive, as they say, you still have to deal with them.
Right.
Right.
And that's done with gentleness and love and concern. It's nobody's shame that they should have done something different. They're just accepted for who they are, where they are, and let's get started helping you
Right. Well,
pass
we're
that.
in our wrap up time now. So any final thoughts that you would like to pass on to us?
One would be that I'm happy to hear from people that might have asked a question and didn't get it answered. I just ask that if people come to my website and want to ask a question, I ask that they please read at least one of the books first, because most of the questions are that we would have a better quality of a conversation if they were a little more conversant in what my partners and I do. And then And they're only $20. It's not going to break the bank. I'll mail you one if you can't afford it. And then after that, let's have a conversation.
Well, spend this time with you. I love your work, and it's very exciting to me to have had this opportunity to speak with you. So thank you so much.
Good. Well, if you're ever in Tucson, let me know.
Okay, I will.
Okay.
All right.